Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to leave it a couple of seconds to get everybody online. We got a fantastic panel today to talk really about intergenerational requirements and diversity. And I think that's a really important topic for anyone in the boardroom, but actually anyone operating in any kind of community in today's world, just to understand the differences that we have between these generations. I'm just giving it a few more minutes to welcome people online. I would also like to start my transcript. So those of you who want to have a transcript of today's events, we will put one up on the website. But if you go to the show captions, it should be available for you. You are able to go to save transcript and save your transcript. I'm hoping everybody will be able to do that. But let me carry on, first of all, to welcome everyone. And please let us know where you're from in the chat function. If you want to share your profile, your LinkedIn profile with people, please do that. It would be lovely to create a community that's discussing this very important topic today. Just in terms of the event, I'm really delighted to be hosting another book launch webinar featuring one of our recommended books on our website. So if you go to the Good Governance Academy's website and click on books, you will see there the books that we are recommending, and we are welcoming you to please go and buy these books. They really certainly can help you. And of course, this is the second time we've welcomed Patrick Dunn to this forum. It's always great to have so much interest in these events, and it's so nice to see so many returning guests and you online. Please do let us know where you're from, as I said in the chat window, and I hope that you're somewhere warmer than Cape Town today. I believe that Johannesburg is quite warm, and it seems like London is all seasons in one day at the moment. While people continue to join, I'll share some tips for those of you who are not familiar with Zoom. First of all, if you can't see your control panel on your screen, press the Alt key on your keyboard, and this will give you access to the chat box where you can tell us where you're from, but also the questions and answers, the Q&A function. Please put your questions in the Q&A function. We are going to leave an opportunity for people to have your questions answered. And please use the reaction, and maybe try it now. Use your reaction button if you like what the guests are saying. If you if it resonates with you, if you'd like to hear more, please use your reactions. Our speakers love to hear your reactions, so please do make good use of these. If you have the questions, as I said, please pop them in the questions in the Q&A box and we'll address them. And please do feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and also to connect with each other on LinkedIn. For those who are not familiar with the Good Governance Academy, we are a non-profit organization that was established by Professor Mervyn King in 2019. We collaborate with universities, business schools, professional bodies, and all other manners of organizations around the world to educate and empower leadership to uncover, address, and overcome critical business issues as a public good. We run regular webinars on current topics as a service to our growing community. And if you'd like to see what we've planned, please head over to the events page. I'll post a link to that in the chat later on. I'd also like to encourage you to join our mailing list, follow us on LinkedIn, but also follow us on YouTube. We're close to 1,000 followers now, so please add your subscribe and like our channel on YouTube. In addition to the webinars, we host colloquia twice a year. These are very high-profile events which have been attended by thousands of people, and the output of this is shared. Of these events are shared with over 5 million people and professionals throughout our support network around the world. We also run these book launch events, and the books are available by clicking on the Buy Now buttons on the website. Anyone who does participate in these webinars is eligible for a certificate of attendance, although some webinars are not available for certification purposes, we will put those, make a big notice of those that are and aren't available for certification. But without any further ado, let me welcome our panel of guests today. I'm going to start with ladies first and introduce Rebecca Robbins. Rebecca is a founder and CEO of a consulting organization at the intersection of brand, culture, and leadership. Really, as we know that strategy, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you want to get anything strategic in your organization, this is really the hard nut to crack, the intersection between brand, culture, and leadership. She works with owners, founders, and leaders across the world, and she is known for her change making across organizations, but also for her transformative energy working with individuals and teams. And her full profile is available on the website if you just click on her picture. And as I mentioned earlier, her picture, she looks so much nicer today than her picture. And I'm sorry, I will replace her picture as soon as I can. The two gentlemen, let me start with Patrick before I hand over to Milton. Patrick, and I seem to have only got his LinkedIn profile, but I will put his actual bio up onto the website. Something went wrong there. But Patrick has been with us before, and he is the author of the award-winning Boards book. And we do have that on our bookshelf as well, if you head over to our books website, webpage. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Milton, who's our host and facilitator today. Milton is a former BBC News Africa bureau chief and South Asia bureau editor. He's an award-winning journalist and media thought leader. In fact, Milton also interviewed Patrick for his Boards book. I'm going to post their profiles on the chat, and I don't want to take up more time so that you can ask your questions and have your questions answered. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Milton with that very quick introduction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carolyn. It's great to be with you again from sunny Johannesburg. I'm happy to see that we've got quite a few of the audience from South Africa, Namibia. I saw someone from Rustenburg, the Platinum Belt of South Africa. So we have quite a good audience for this amazing discussion, which I found so interesting as I was plowing through the work that Patrick and Rebecca have put together. I just want to say thank you so much for inviting us and for being back here. I love the work that you do, and we hope that we continue the relationship. Now, can I start with Rebecca and Patrick? You can answer the question in the way I asked. So Rebecca, you go first. What was the motivation behind writing this book, 5 Generations at Work, How We Can Win Together?
Well, thank you, Milton, for starting with a brilliant question. And, you know, motivation is something that Patrick and I talk about a lot in the book and underpins a lot of what works. If I may, I think in the spirit of 5 generations, I'm going to give 5 very short answers. First of all, we have 5 generations at work for the first time in history. And yet, you know, what we see is we've genuinely been having the wrong conversation about generations. And by that, we mean the conversation has been so divisive, negative, focused on the stereotypes that Patrick and I saw really an opportunity to take this to a much more constructive place. The second point is that we don't have time to waste. There's very much an urgency of our times. As we know, there are raging challenges across climate crisis, geopolitics, the exponential rise of tech, which brings with it both huge opportunities, but also challenges. And of course, what's so exciting when we have 5 generations at work for the first time is what we can do with that if we unlock the potential. The third point is, and this was borne out through all the evidence from our research and our work, is that, you know, there is much more inspiring thinking and progressive work out there. You know, we were doing it ourselves. We were seeing it in the everyday over the past 6 years, and it's certainly borne out in the book. And the fourth and fifth points are really is that this is what triggered us to get serious about undertaking research that informed we're not suggesting here are more models and frameworks, but what we wanted to do was put real work in the hands of everyone who can go forth and actually replicate and try it on. And then fifth, importantly, as I say, this is about a call to action. You know, we wrote this book to inspire action in everyone from the youngest to the oldest. And we can also share that the youngest voice in the book is 18, the oldest is 80. And so that really is what inspired and motivated us. We're writing really for all the hundreds and thousands of people that we really want to inspire into change for good together.
Wow, I love the youngest 8 to 80. Patrick?
Yeah, well, I think Rebecca's really summarized it incredibly well. I mean, I suppose I'd use two words which really motivated us to do this. One is frustration with that, what we thought was a lazy, divisive discourse. And the second word is opportunity. I mean, you know, I'm a businessman, Rebecca's a businesswoman, you know, and we both do stuff in the social sector. And actually, you can make a lot more money, you can have a lot more impact if you actually find a collaborative way to get the best out of the generations. And so we were very positively minded. I think as well, we both have a sort of evidence-based and solution-focused approach to life. So actually the other motivation was to find out, to learn ourselves. So, and I think we both learned a huge amount, you know, in our travels, in our conversations about the topic, and we found all sorts of things that we didn't know were going on, and actually that was inspiring. So yeah.
So both of you are established authors. We all know your previous work, and you've done amazingly well there. What was the sort of the convergence point with your previous work in your other books with this 5 generations at work? What was the connecting point from your previous work to what we have now?
Rebecca?
Who shall go first? Shall I go?
Oh, go on, you go first.
I love this. We're all so wonderfully polite. This is wonderful. Thank you. I think actually Carolyn summed it up brilliantly at the beginning. I loved what you said, Carolyn, when you talked about the work I do, which is very much at the intersection of brands, culture, and leadership. And you know, it's interesting over my career so far, just over 20 years in business, having come out of Cambridge, and as I track back, and you know, Patrick and I have been talking about this lately, reflecting on our journeys and what has mattered to us, and how we've got to this point around really what matters to us now, and also again what we can do with this. And for me, that was this connection between brand and culture had always been there. I was, you know, deeply curious about things, and deeply curious about people. And I think, again, as a linguist by background, I've always been naturally curious about leaning in. So my previous book, which was about, this is my third, but the connection between brands and culture and excellence. So the subtitle of my last book, the title was Meta Luxury, Brands and the Culture of Excellence, was very much related to best practice, leading practice on how we're connecting brand culture on the inside to what we're doing and influencing and impacting on the outside. So that's one thing in terms of what I've carried forward from my journey and from my last book. And I think the other thing is, as Patrick was talking about the work that we're both doing, in complementary and in different respects, but I think certainly for me, there was work that I was doing with businesses and organizations ever more, Milton, around rising talent, rising leadership programs, looking at different career pathways. And as we think about how the future of work is evolving, we're going to need to look at that very differently, and we're going to have to move faster as organizations. And second of all, you know, there was something happening around this next generation boards work that both Patrick and I have been involved in so many ways. We're big believers in platforms and programs, not for the sake of what we see, and that's very different. I think I'll just make one last point here, which is not about projects and initiatives, because that's a whole other ballgame, actually, where a lot of companies are getting bogged down and having too many things and too many distractions. What we see at a lot of this work, it's about sustainable platforms and solutions that are hardwired to the business strategy. And that always begins going back to the purpose of the business, connecting it into a strong culture. And from that, you can really empower both your workforce and, of course, then hardwire it into what you're doing in terms of innovation, better productivity, etc., and over time influencing the wider ecosystem. So that's really, I think, a common thread for me. It goes back to this intersection between brand, culture, and leadership.
Yeah, and for me, it was about, I mean, in the board's book, I mean, one of the things you have to do on the board is, you know, maximize potential and minimize risk. And so I see this whole area as being quite central to that. But also in the boards book, you struggle sometimes to think, to fit all the things in that you want to get into a book. And I did do something around next gen boards. That was back in 2020. But I didn't feel I sort of did that bit sort of the full justice. And next gen boards is only one aspect of this whole topic. So I thought it would be great, and actually great to work with Rebecca as well, who have different insights and to bring to really focus in on this intergenerational subject, because I do feel there is an incredible opportunity within it. And so yeah, that is a perfect link.
Some housekeeping announcement. The book will be available on the 26th of September. It's already been on Amazon for 4 weeks. So if you just go online, you should be able to access it. And there will be a link as well here on this chat, which Carolyn mentioned earlier. So please do tap into it, and please buy the book. The stories are amazing. They will blow your mind. They talk to NGOs, big multinationals, family-run businesses, and everything else in between. Now, one of my fascinations about this, Patrick and Rebecca, is I'm on the African continent. Every conference I go to, even dinner parties, they tell you, oh, this is the youngest continent, the future of work is here. Well, I still see my caps are still written made in China. Any connection from what you've done, from the work you've done? And I know your research has spent about 6 years for this book, which is amazing. I know people on the internet who write books from Twitter on 2 days research, and it shows. So please just give us an insight into what you think the impact of intergenerational work for the African continent would be in relation to the work you've already done.
Yeah. So do you want me to lead on that, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure, please.
Go for it, Patrick.
So yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time in Africa. It's great to see some friends in the list. I mean, Africa is so different as a continent to the rest of the world. I mean, 1 in 4 people on the planet will soon be African, by 2050. If you look at the population pyramids, we've done some good statistical analysis in the book of this. You look at the shape of Africa, it's like an equilateral triangle. This young bit. If you look at Europe, it's like this. If you look at Japan, it's like that. Everywhere else, every other region, is very different shape. So what this means is that there will be, millennials are already likely to be the biggest group in the workforce at the moment, but Gen Z are coming up fast, and Gen Alpha, which is where a lot of Africans will come up behind that. So in the next 30 years, there will be more younger people than older people. At the moment, the bulk of CEOs in Africa and everywhere else are Gen X. They are people born between 1965 and 1980. So they're kind of mid-40s to late 50s. So you've got this leadership transition, and you've got this emerging group, but you've also got a group of CEOs who are having to manage, work with, recruit, inspire, motivate these younger people. And so interestingly, I think Africa will lead in many ways, the best ways in which to work with these generations. You also have in Africa, as you do have in many other parts of the world, the belief and the respect and the trust in the wisdom of older generations. And so I think some of the things that we found in the book, the ways in which people are involving, even those who've retired, so they're not still older in the workforce, but they've retired. If you take, BMW or some of the companies in Japan, the way that people are involving people in their businesses is really quite exciting, I think. And of course, we haven't talked about AI, and of course, that Africa has leapfrogged in many sectors, in many things. And of course, you know, we have the convergence of that with us too at the moment. So we think it's going to be a fascinating place. But fundamentally, with 1 billion more people in Africa, we have to find productive, purposeful things for people to do, as well as, you know, spur the economic growth of the region. So I think it's just going to be a whole fascinating cocktail of things that are playing out. But some things Africa will probably get the hang of before the rest of the world, I think.
I was just thinking, Rebecca, yesterday, because the timing could not have been perfect, more perfect, with Joe Biden having to step down because he's old or age. And now we're bringing in Kamala Harris. And I've been looking at the activities in Kenya.
Yeah.
The young people are out on the streets. They don't want to be sort of governed in the same way as the older generations and baby boomers. They say, you know, we are young, we should be treated differently. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think a big point that we talk about in the book is that this is an all generations opportunity. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that if we go back to the Biden-Harris dynamic and what's playing out there, there are a lot of analogies, aren't there, in the corporate world? And I was just speaking at a conference in Sweden a few weeks ago. And it was interesting because we had the likes of Yuval Noah Harari, Daniel Susskind, like a lot of big leaders and thinkers in terms of philosophy, AI, business, society. So the context was a big sense of this confluence of things. And one of the panels, the closing question they asked to the panelists, Milton, you'd have loved this, was, so how do we all hang on to our jobs then? So the people at the top of organizations. It was really interesting because one of the panelists, she said in a very diplomatic, but also quite feisty way. And she said, it's not the right question to ask. And again, it opened up again, I think, a very productive conversation around the questions we should be asking, because are we thinking intentionally enough about career pathways in the first place and what that looks like? I was doing a leadership program at Cambridge just the other week with some rising gens, and we were talking exactly about this. You know, leadership pathways are no longer going to look like this, sort of vertical, ever thinner, ever higher. Already they're changing in terms of we might zigzag here, we might make a horizontal move. So the whole shape and trajectory of our careers, I think there was there are many stats, right, that we could all draw on, but I'll take an average from a number that are out there. So I know Patrick as a statistician loves a good stat, but there's one that I'll take as an average. You know, we are going to start having 7 careers and 20 jobs as an average. That looks very different to what has been over the past 20 years. And I think that's something that we really need to lean into both ends. One, for the young generations coming through, and second of all, for older gens, because there's a very strange tension playing out, isn't there, in terms of one, older gens retirement. What does that look like? We're going to want and need to work for longer. How do we value expertise? Where does that tipping point of wisdom start to lose relevance? Because, you know, we see it in the UK, Patrick and I, with a lot of the people that we talk to who come to us and talk about, well, Rebecca, there's a lot of age bias going on. You know, people hit even like sort of 45, 50. And so where does expertise get diluted? Or where actually is it valued as that lifetime value, lifetime experience and expertise? So your point again about the Biden-Harris and, you know, about what's going on in Kenya, one, there's an interesting reflection that you posit. I love it. You could almost imagine somebody data visualizing this. There's something, isn't there, as an interesting conversation at the extremities of age. What does that look like, both in terms of the youngest and the oldest? And what is our responsibility in our capacity as leaders and as managers to be doing something about it? So whether it's bridging the gaps or looking differently at the shape and trajectory of careers in organizations. So yes, a bang on the money question, Milton, as ever.
Yeah, and I think the three things that are, I mean, you know, Rebecca and I have talked about a lot are, you know, in terms of the leaders, if you really want to be collaborative and you really want to do something about this, I mean, you have to be able to understand each other. And I think a lot of the tension and a lot of the you know, the violence and some of the other things are because people don't really understand each other. And then you have to find ways to communicate with each other effectively, to mobilize people, to inspire people, to resolve conflict. And I think a lot of it is about mindset. So there are some skills, behaviors, things like that to develop, but a lot of this is about mindset. And I think if you have, what I've always referred to as a maximizing mindset, you're more likely to get on better in this world of flux that we're in, because you're looking for opportunity, you're looking to combine resources, you're looking to achieve things together, and you value individual difference rather than resent it. And I think at the moment, there's too much resentment of difference. We see that in all sorts of aspects of life. It isn't just the politics, which is pretty extreme in some parts of the world. It's in at micro level as well. But I think that understanding each other, finding ways to communicate with each other effectively across not just age, but other things too, and then really having this maximizing mindset, I think will actually create a tremendous opportunity. Sort of feels to me that at a time of great disruption, there's the possibility of renaissance. We've seen that after other big disruptions in the world historically, and I'm a positive person. I'd like to think that actually all these difficulties are really providing the fertile ground for some sort of renaissance.
Any practical examples that you would like to share, particularly perhaps for smaller organizations? I know you've spoken to very large corporates and you quote their stories, but any sort of advice that emerges for smaller organizations or family-run businesses, for instance?
Rebecca?
Yeah, I think, and I think 2 points there, Milton, is that we were very intentional in the body of work that we shared, is that it is across all sectors. We wanted to get to all 7 continents. We got to 4, which is not bad, but there are more books in the making, I am sure. So that was very intentional in our mission. We wanted to celebrate work going on across different organizations, different cultures. And the other point there, before I go in to share an example, was that even or especially in very large organizations, you can apply that to a very small organization. And so that was very intentional about the work that we've shared. You'll also find, hopefully when you get to read the book, we wanted to make it very accessible. So the idea is that a lot of this conversation, there's a deep research in there and the evidence base behind it, but a lot of it is in dialogue and in conversation. So you'll hear us in conversation with 4 or 5 generations in a workplace. So there's a bit of context to paint there. Family business, as you say, hugely inspiring because they're generational by construct. So you will see a big section dedicated there to family businesses across the world. I do a lot of work with family businesses and with founders. And I think a couple of things to pull out for everyone on the call today. And, again, we would very much love to hear, you might be working you might be on this call and you're working for a family business, or you are leading a family business, you are an owner. So would love your lens. But the purpose of family business, and I think, that inherent reason for being, why they're in business, really is the starting point, for where this all begins, because those values that are central to organizing principles in a family business hold a lot of lessons for non-family businesses. So this is why we wanted family business in the book. So you think these are businesses that think in terms of generations. How are we going to make the business sustain and stay relevant over time? And again, if we posit that in the context of non-family businesses, how often do I hear, especially with young leaders that I work with and rising talent, they say to me, well, I have these big ambitions, but of course I'm working in a world where quarterly reporting, annual reports, very short-term thinking and targets. And I think what is interesting about family businesses is the license they give themselves. And of course, they do have the freedom to do this, to think in longer term impact. And so again, there's a nice thread that we see connecting generations and generational thinking to regeneration, because as Patrick talked about, we are very keen with this book to be part of solutions. And the work that is evidenced, if you look at whether it's the examples in family businesses or otherwise, the output is often hardwiring to sustainable solutions. And that is really inspiring. And I'll share one of the families. It's a family called the Pentland Group. They operate a portfolio of brands across the world. You will recognize, I'm sure, they're in lifestyle, they're in sports, everything from brands such as LS or the iconic Speedo. But I think there's one thing that I love, and there are many stories from the Pentland conversation that we had, but they talk a lot about connecting brand relevance, so how they stay relevant through their brands to the generational makeup of their organization. So you can imagine some of these brands skew very young, some of these brands skew across, they need to be relevant across 3 or 4 generations. And so sometimes, with the brand like Berghaus, they're in the process of how do we reinvent this brand now to be relevant for new generations. And so they talk to us a lot about how they are connecting very intentionally the employee experience to the consumer experience. And that's something we found very inspiring with Pentland. It was true of a lot of others. But that's a brand doing a lot of very intentional intergenerational work, and that's having a positive uplift for the employees, and it's having an amazing impact in terms of how they're staying relevant with consumers. And again, that goes back to Patrick's point around this is a circular economy of what's happening on the inside for how we better grow as organizations.
Another example might be from a small tech company that employs a lot of younger people, but it's got some older people in the mix as well, and they've got a sort of a young, it's an advisory board effectively, but that group is just challenging them on the way the speed with which they do things, the processes that they have, is coming up with innovation as well. So they're not on the main board, but they're kind of feeding into that. So it's a sort of version of a next gen board. Very practical. You can do that in a very small company. I think one of the interesting things about many of the examples is not many of them took a lot of investment. Most of them actually were really just changing the way things were done. And in fact, some of them have reduced cost, which is always good if you can get more value and less cost. But it's just about doing things differently. It's about engaging people in a different way.
What you just segued me very nicely into my next question. I was going to ask, what does it mean for boards? I mean, you are the best person to ask about boards, right? Because I read your book, Boards, which is on your shelf there. I just wanted to know, in this work, what you've from your research, what's your take? How does this impact boards?
I think it's going to change the composition of boards. I think they're going to be more age diverse, if that's an expression. I think it's going to change the way that they make decisions and think about the different stakeholders. So, we often think of a customer. We think of segmenting our customer groups by different aspects, and many businesses for a very long time have segmented customers by age. That's not a new thing. I think the other thing is we'll think about them maybe we've got more data, we think about them maybe in a more sophisticated way. I mean, one of the very interesting examples is that, often people think that the behavioral characteristics will be the same across a generation. What's actually happening and actually best typified in Korea, interestingly, is that there's a younger generation where the voting intentions of male and female are very different. They're sort of polarizing, which is really quite interesting. So I think we will think in a more sophisticated way about generations as well, because we're thinking about generations. Like most things, when you start to think about it, they're a bit more complicated than they might appear on the surface. I think that also the way that boards interact with organizations will change. I've recently taken over a new chair role at Royal Voluntary Service, and it seems natural to me, and it's expected that you will spend time with the younger people in the organization. They will get the opportunity to interview you and all that, things which historically were not perhaps the norm. Personally, I find that very energizing and satisfying, and lots of interesting ideas emerge. I think there will be lots of challenges though, where, you know, other people's perceptions are different to ours. So one of my friends recently has said, you know, he loves all this sort of stuff, but it seems to take him a lot longer to get things done because he's listening more. So I said to him, you know, well, that must be great, really, isn't it? You know, taking a bit longer to make better decisions rather than making bad ones quickly. And so I think there will be lots of consequences, that some of which, you know, are unpredictable and we've no idea yet. I think that's one of the exciting things about it.
I think that's a brilliant point, Patrick, because I think I've seen the same in corporate on that regard, Milton, in terms of next generation boards that I've set up or that I've advised on, or just, again, done a lot of research on. And I think you touched on 2 points there, Patrick. I just love to build on the corporate context, because we have to think about, if we're setting up a next generation board for the first time, it shouldn't be tokenistic. And that's very easy to happen out of good intentions. What I've always said to companies is, if you're setting this up, it's one, going back to that point, it should not be another project or initiative in the array of, this is something different. It is a platform that should be hardwired to the business strategy. And we're not suggesting that it should be there as long as the business is in business, but it should have a lifetime of value. And the second point is, and I've seen this in many contexts, that touches on what you said, Patrick, about your friend and the example. It will also require unlearning. And I think unlearning is something we've got to get a lot more comfortable with across all generations. One, because if we think about the exponential rise of tech alone, right? We are all grappling with this, with all its possibilities, with all its challenges. At the same time, you know, when we put different generations together for the first time, you often got younger gens. I've worked with younger gens who've come to me on a one-to-one basis, and you can see it's imposter syndrome kicking in, where, do I really deserve this position? You know, I now have to step into the shoes, and that's one thing. And then another thing is, you know, you've got leaders who sort of say they want a next generation board, and then of course they experience some of the things that you're talking about, Patrick, and you have to go through an unlearning process there. So I think the big point here is we have to be very open and honest, going back to those points that we talk about in the book, importance of understanding, transparency and communication, because the more foundational work you do from the beginning, you're setting up yourself for success, for a much healthier cross-generational open dialogue, because that's where every time in all the work evidence in the book, that's where the real magic starts happening.
I mentioned this in our previous call last week, that I found this quotation in the book, which you cite, by Anne Carson: "To stay human is to break a limitation," which reminded me of the South African Ubuntu concept as well. Tell me about that, because that is really the heart of it. The other thing is, you guys said you don't want to change patterns, right? You don't want to, you are really just trying to get everyone to think differently. You are trying to change the mindset. Is that correct?
It is. Shall I riff on the Anne Carson there, Patrick? Yeah. As Patrick knows, I'll come
back to Ubuntu.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. And it was, Milton, honestly, as we were chatting, the three of us last week, you honestly, you know, you personally made my day in that moment, because I will say to everyone on this call, and it's true of my other books as well, is that 5 Generations at Work is not your usual business book. So you will find in there quotes and inspiration from literature, from art, philosophy, and music. And that's very intentional, because those are things that remind us of our humanity, of what connects us from human to human. And that's deeply important to us, because, you know, Patrick and I hope we like to think of us as pragmatic optimists. That's one of the things that's brought us together over the years, and all of the intention. But I think, just to pick up on Anne Carson, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Toni Morrison, then hand to Patrick, but I think that quote, "to stay human is to break a limitation," from Anne Carson. Anne Carson's writing is really important. And it's important because her writing not only spans different types of genre, but also crosses genre. And that's really the spirit of our book, which is at the intersection of things. So for us to open with those words at the very beginning, it was this challenge by Anne Carson around what it is to really think about what it is to be human. in 2024 and beyond, you know, through the age of AI, through what we see as this new era of a potential renaissance, and also to break down these limitations, as Patrick said, what motivated us was also, we're tired of this negativity. You know, we do not have time in the world. We are fighting on too many levels with everything that's going on. Let's channel the energy we've got in the time that we have as humans together for change, for good. And there's another one I just want to mention. I'm not going to give all the quotes away. They're too many. But I love Toni Morrison so much. And I love what she wrote about in her Nobel lecture. These Nobel lectures are amazing. She talked about meaning that secures our human difference. And that's very true of what we speak to in the book. So this is human difference in all its celebration and all its dimensions, but it's again how we connect each one of our individual, our collective human difference into something much larger, much greater. And I'll hardwire that into our subtitle of our book, which is also very important, which is how we win together for good. And we think about the meaning of for good in all its multiple senses. That's why, again, these words, I think, are so important to us, because this is transcending who we are as disciplines, as roles, as titles, as cultures. This is about for something far deeper as humans to humans. So thank you, Milton, for bringing up that important insight. And we're glad that you loved that quote.
Brilliant, brilliant. We are about to come to the end of this segment of the conversation. We're going to open up for questions now. Please get your questions and comments, if you like, ready. Carolyn has got some already coming through. But before we get there, can we just sum up? I mean, you've kind of touched on it in the answers that you gave, but what do you want us to take away from the book? What's the intention for us as we finish reading the book? What do you want us to do?
Well,
Patrick.
I mean, I had one word which summed up a few things, and Rebecca will have a sort of similar but different take on it, I guess. But the word is inspiration, and I mean, I think we found writing it that the size of the opportunity was much bigger than we thought when we started writing the book. So we're inspired by actually the scale of the opportunity and the number of different facets that there are to it, many more than we first imagined. I think the point I made earlier that, you know, this is most of the gains will come from a mindset shift rather than spending lots of money or, you know, having some fancy new program. I think it's a sort of mindset shift. And I think the other thing, the final thing, was that it's in every place, every sector, every size and every type of organization, whether they be businesses, governments. You know, we've got some fantastic examples of things happening within governments, the Welsh government, the EU, and so on. So I think, you know, the main takeaway we think is we were inspired by doing the research and writing it, and we just hope we've been able to transmit some of that so that other people would be inspired too.
I think that's very much it for us, Milton, is that, you know, books are written for many different reasons. This was intentionally what are people going to do? Again, I'll use another quote from Ursula Le Guin, which is amazing. She talks about words are events. Words are events. And I think, you know, I see this book very much as an event. And I want to put that in the hands of as many people as possible so that they will go and do something for good with it. And I think that's why 5 Generations at Work intentionally open sources work. We are giving things away intentionally and very purposefully. These are replicable solutions. You know, you might read one thing, you know, and we honestly don't mind if you don't read the whole thing. You know, you might say, okay, that chapter is from me. I am going to read all that work, and that is the only thing I need. And that's fantastic, as long as you go and do something with it. This is really the mission. And that's why I go back to that point, is that this was always, Milton, a platform for others. Yes, of course, it's about us in the sense of, there was this vision and the work that we are doing and what we are tangibly progressing towards every day in our humble way with the work that we're working with on for businesses and organizations. But it was written by 5 generations for 5 generations. You know, you will find that youngest voice of 18, the oldest voice of 80, and that's very meaningful. So I guess our wish or our will is, you know, buy the book or gift the book, you know, share it as a gift, maybe to a different generation. How amazing would that be if, you know, we're all sharing things from one generation to each other? But I think the summation for us, the summary is, if you're energized to make an impact in the world and you don't know where to start, potentially if you're a younger gen, or maybe if you're an older gen and making a career pivot, there is something here for you. Second of all, there is no one solution. There are many, and they're drawn from every sort of walk of life that we've touched on. And I'm going to share a quote from somebody in the book. She works for one of the most influential luxury groups that I've worked with over the years. It's amazing. LVMH, as we know, LVMH owns Dior, Vuitton, Sephora, you know, all those luxury and lifestyle brands. It's now, maybe we would call it, maybe the LVMH Olympics is just happening in Paris on Friday. And this is one woman who had a vision, and we're not going to give the case study away, but this tells us about the story and the work that she did across a business which has over 200,000 employees. So if one person in a business of that size can do it, anyone. And she says, anybody can inspire us. It is about staying humble and listening. Something very small today can become something huge tomorrow.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. That is incredibly powerful. I also liked, this is just a little taster for you guys, because I know you're going to buy the book and you're already clicking on the link. There's a beautiful quote from Ken Frazier, who is a former executive chairman and CEO of Mac. And he says, leadership is in the many small, quiet moments. And it's not about the big moments. And then there is another one from a quotation from Rebecca Henderson in her book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World of Fire. Real change happens in small rooms and small actions that accumulate over time. Now, this takes me to, I just saw a comment from Damien. Damien has a comment. He says, in the first business I worked in, the directors each had a special key for the elevator that would take them directly to the top floor boardroom without the elevator stopping on the way. A couple of times the director shooed us out so that they wouldn't have to interact with employees on the way up to a meeting. Now, that's the boardroom and the elevator guy that needs to read this book.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
They need to buy 100 copies.
When I lived in India, one of the most fascinating things I found was the lift, the interaction in the lift. You know, when you get into a lift in London or even in Johannesburg and Sandton, people just walk in and they kind of look down and they look, you know, they kind of tap and they kind of ignore, you know, whereas in India, you just get into the lift, right? You pack until the alarm goes off. So they're probably doing it different, but they don't talk as well. So we need more communication. Any questions, Carolyn? Are you getting any questions?
There's one that's come through from the YouTube, Milton, and that's speaking about on this intergenerational, and Patrick's comment, Rebecca, sorry, your comment about CEOs, most CEOs, I can't remember who it was, are Gen X. And it actually was tied into something that Damien said. How are we going to make sure that we don't throw away the wisdom? That isn't, you know, that we are retaining the wisdom and not, you know, the up and comings going, well, I know how to do this better. You don't know what we know today. But there's all of this experience that sits there. How do we not throw that away? And maybe start with Patrick. Well, I'll put it to you, Milton. Thanks.
Yeah, no. Go ahead. The question is already out. So, Patrick, you take it away.
Well, Rebecca, you.
No, go for it, Patrick. And I'll follow you.
I think this is at the heart of a lot of this, and that's around respect. It's about understanding difference. I have benefited, most people have benefited from input from, you know, lots of wise older people and lots of wise younger people. Wisdom isn't just you know, it's not directly linked to age. Clearly, you'd hope that as your experience grows, you become wiser. So that maybe there is a correlation, but it's not necessarily that way. I think we have highlighted in the book some great examples of where people are using, you know, older generations in the workforce, and as I said before, who've no longer working for that company. But I think the key is really about this respecting and listening. And it's very hard to influence people if they don't respect you. It's very hard to respect people if you don't understand them. So you have to understand people, and you have to invest in that, whether you're young or whether you're old, to do that, to understand what they can bring, their contributions. So that for me is it, understanding and listening, and the core of it is respect.
And I think respect is such a powerful word. I mean, as we were talking about Milton, last week, it's, we were very purposeful. We don't want to fill this book with tons of frameworks and, new models. I think Margaret Heffernan, in a brilliant piece in the FT, talked about this a while ago, that we don't really need more leadership frameworks right now in 2024. There are probably enough. Actually, a lot of this is about what we're talking about today. And I think a couple of things to build on that. First of all, I think we have to also acknowledge this bias and stereotyping that is going on with all generations. It genuinely pains us. I mean, there isn't a day goes by where we see something on social media where there's one generation being dismissive about another. This is not right. This has to stop. This is profoundly disrespectful. We are better than this as human beings, which is why, one wish with the book is that let's end this distraction and negativity. Let's give an example of that with older generations. How often are older generations sometimes written off as not being, tech super literate? Actually, some of the most profound game changers I know in my network and forerunners of AI are all Gen Xers. I'm a Gen Xer, and they are highly tech literate, as equal. So again, we need to think about sort of what are the assumptions that we're making around age. Second of all, there's something I think around more plural and fractal careers, because the term portfolio career has been something that over the years, if people were looking into retirement, they'd move perhaps from sort of, one main role to then let's take on a portfolio of different board roles. That's still there. But what we're seeing now, and this is starting to come through in the research in the book as well, is that as young people don't necessarily, as Gen Zers coming through, want to have maybe their side hustle and their own passion project that they're doing since university. They have other things that matter to them in life. Actually, a main job and main role doesn't occupy the same status that it did necessarily as 20, 30, 40 years ago. So that notion of, what we are loyal to, what inspires us and motivates us has changed. And I think that's true of older generations now thinking about career pivots, plural careers, fractal careers. And then the final thing is we have to, if we are running organizations, if we are CHROs, HR leaders, if we are, on a leadership team of any shape and form, what does knowledge transfer look like across an organization, and how are we valuing each other's experience and expertise? Because it might be that, XYZ individual who doesn't necessarily want to be leading or managing people anymore, but they are an amazing guru in whatever subject or discipline or practice or craft they are. How fantastic is that if we unlock and actually re-energize and re-liberate their role as a practice leader or as a craft leader? So I think that's hugely exciting about what we could be doing in organizations and how we could be thinking about knowledge and expertise differently.
And also, I think we make decisions together, we make choices together. Actually, that's a good way of respecting other people's contributions, I think. Whereas if you have an old group managing a younger group, the old group makes the decisions, the young people just do what they're told. That's not going to be nearly as productive. I think I found with, particularly with the EY Foundation Youth Advisory Board, I think some of the younger people have, many times said, wow, I didn't realize how to do that, or I didn't realize that person was so smart. I just thought they were old. Or, you get these things both ways. And equally, older people thinking, what could a young person contribute to a board? Well, wow, that person just did. So I think there's something about giving it a go as well, about trying it positively, being prepared to take a risk, being prepared to fail. That's really positive, I think.
Yeah, there's a very good one here from Gavin Welbeck. He says, for many boards, you kind of spoke to that in a way, because he says, can you share from a key example of how to convey the value or how it has been derived? Yeah.
So, I mean, if I just use that one that, Rebecca and I were on the EY Foundation board, that's where we met. Then, I think the different insights can add a lot. Different thoughts about you. So you've made a decision. How are you going to communicate that decision? Actually, we had tremendous value very early on from the Youth Advisory Board, because we had one from the start 10 years ago, about how we might communicate the proposition that we had to young people as well as to corporates. Young people were very helpful in terms of helping us think in a different way about that. They also, because of the nature of that, but it's the same in markets where you're serving, a lot of young people, they give you increased legitimacy in the marketplace too. So I think there's many dimensions as to why that can bring real tangible value. This is not a fluffy thing. This is something that I believe passionately creates significant value, both financially and also an impact if you're in the social sector. I mean, there are lots of good social sector examples as well as business ones in the book.
And if that's okay, and if we just have time, just a quick build to that, because I really, Gavin, I thank you for your point, because I really like your framing around how we drive the incorporation of diversity. It's such a powerful point. So I can also share a tangible truth that has run through the past 6 years of research and through the growing body of global work, which is these next generation boards, hands down, outperform all dimensions and factors of diversity over leadership teams and boards. And how inspiring is that? So there's a vision also that I had a number of years ago as I started setting up next generation boards, thinking, well, the more that we do this, the more that gap and that difference is going to be obvious. And so that impetus to close that gap is going to be there, because you're going to be looking at a next gen board of maybe 10 individuals, which is one of the most diverse collectives in your organization, thinking about what your leadership team looks like, what your board looks like. And, is there commonality there, or are there some gaps? And that's, a very inspiring, empowering way to do that. So thanks for such a great question, Gavin.
Thanks, Nusrain, as well. Nusrain Ibrahim also made the point of he's a strong believer in mixed teams. So thanks for that contribution there, Nusrain. Any more, Carolyn? Do we have one more? We're now coming up to a full hour.
Thanks, Milton. There's one from Anthony. With these wide varying age groups working in organizations, is this not constraining growth and optimal performance due to different culture and thinking? Now, I know we touched on that, but if I can take a different slant to this, is that what the message has been coming through, and Patrick, you said it's not about spending money, it's actually the difficult work of working on our humanity. Are we at danger of being too inwardly focused while we try to do this and not able to actually deliver the amounts that we have been delivering?
Becca?
I would say, I think the point is, I think it shouldn't become a distraction. That's the thing. I think what's become a distraction, Carolyn, is the pervasive divisive discourse that has got caught up in the wrong things. And our premise is very much, first of all, if we stop getting caught up in this clutter. And by the way, I encourage everyone on this call, if you're not doing it already, do not respond to the clickbait. If you see things going on around negative generational discourse, just ignore it, because that's the best thing we can do, is not put fuel on the fire, number one. And second of all, it goes back to what Patrick and I talk a lot about, which is that point around mindset. So, the reality is, with a more age diverse workforce, yes, we have like a wider spectrum to deal with. But actually, if we can get to the answers pretty quickly, if we start to look at what we talk about in the book and get inspired by what others are doing. So therefore, I think, Carolyn, it's always connecting. And as I've always said throughout my career, it's connecting culture on the inside to culture on the outside. So the two are symbiotic.
Thank you so much. Any more? We have a minute to close. Any more? Or should we allow our panelists to give us closing remarks?
I think that would be great. Thank you, Milton.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Okay, Patrick, you go first.
Oh no, Rebecca, go first. No.
Oh,
All right.
we're so polite. I love this. So, I really would close out by saying a huge thank you, Milton and Carolyn, to the two of you. What a deeply human individuals you are. What joy to have discovered. And again, you know, the work that you're doing is phenomenal. It's so important. What an amazing community of people on this call. I'd love to have had another hour where we stopped talking and we just put the microphone on all 80 people who are on this. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you for giving space for this conversation. It's really inspiring. So thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
I just reinforce that. Thanks so much. And would be great to have sort of connect on LinkedIn with us, add other thoughts and things we can, and really wish you every success.
Thank you. This reminds me, this whole conversation reminds me of one of my heroes, a man called Desmond Mpilo Tutu, who once told us that you are human because of other humans. You cannot be fully you until I'm fully me. You and me are connected. This is what I got from this book. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Milton.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much for the comments.
Thank you, Milton.
And the emojis. I see a lot of red hearts and claps.
Oh, yeah. Coming through.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Milton, for facilitating this really important conversation. Fabulous job, as always. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.